So thank you again for taking the time today to answer some questions. And I've told you before, I barely know anything about your field of research. And I feel like I'm not the only person who doesn't really have a clue about, space-related issues. And I hope this interview will kind of change it a little bit at least. So before we start with the interview bit, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your person or your job and your field of research, like just an overview in a few sentences.
Of course. So it's really my pleasure to be interviewed today. And I'm Frédéric Marin. So I'm an astrophysicist working at the Astronomical Observatory of Strasbourg in France. I am a member of the CNRS, the research field in France, and I'm a permanent member here for a year now. I have a specialty in terms of astrophysics, which is high energy phenomena, including supermassive black holes, and death of stars. I'm working specifically on the detection, understanding, evolution, and formation of supermassive black holes using what we call the polarization of light, one state of light, and this over the whole electromagnetic spectrum. In addition to that, I am also working as some extra field of expertise in deep space anthropology. So basically, the survival and evolution of population in space for space exploration, but also for space mining and space interstellar space travels. I'm working on that within the team, the heritage team that comprises researchers from Strasbourg, but from the Faculty of Science and also for biology department, but also with private companies in the international world.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned some topics we're gonna maybe talk about a little bit later on, but I kind of want to start the interview with an overview over some major developments in your field of research during the past maybe 1 or 2 years. Could you give us some examples? Like, what were some milestones in the last few years?
In which field?
I'm mainly thinking about the media talking about Jeff Bezos going to space or something like that. Some major milestones. Yeah.
There have been major milestones. Maybe not over the last there was over the last 1 or 2 years, but I would say over the last decade.
Okay.
There are many things that happened. I'm very briefly thinking about the Rosetta spacecraft that went towards the comet 67P Gerasimov-Gerasimenko and were able to land a probe on the comet to do some scientific measurement of the comet surface and composition, which is extremely important for the understanding of the evolution of our solar system. We were also able to, the global astronomical community was also able to land onto an asteroid, the Ryugu asteroid, more precisely. We have been able to send spacecraft on the moon to start a bio-experiment, which is the Chang'e 4 spacecraft that was able to grow cotton seeds on the surface of the moon and create a small biosphere. I can think about the development and know the relevance of reusable rockets for space exploration and sending things to space. So the development also of private industries in this sector, in particular SpaceX, Blue Origin, just to cite a few of them. The opening of space for space tourism, which also is a new way of thinking about space and the democratization of space. Exactly. And in addition to that, very, very recently, a day ago, 2 days ago, there has been the first claimed detection of an exoplanet in a different galaxy than the Milky Way, which is unbelievable if it is true, but we need to take it with a grain of salt because we still need to process properly all the data. And well, I mean, that's already a lot. And there are plenty of missions that are thought and which are envisioned for Moon and Mars exploration by humans. So there is a lot going on. And in particular in Europe, within the CNES that I was part of with the French Spatial Agency, but more globally the ESA, the European Space Agency, there has been a lot of development for the new Ariane launchers. There has been a lot of exciting success with respect to sending probes, cameras to Mars, and also for a lot of space-related activity about the International Space Station.
That's actually really a lot. Especially interesting, I think, is you mentioned space tourism as kind of like a democratization of the space. What do you understand? Like, what do you mean with this term?
I mean that it is the first times, no, it happened a few times already, that we are able to send humans in space, humans which are not from the military domain or which are not scientists. So far about the ISS, we have and other space stations before, such as Mir, Skylab, or Salyut space station. There has been people from the military and scientists to do scientific experiments. But now, common people, common, I would not say very common, but I would say the folk, human folk, is able to go in space for doing nothing related to military or scientific activities and duties. But here, those are the people which have the largest wealth and more money on Earth. Of course, we start with those kind of people, but at least it is the first step for the human folk, humanity, to go in space to do something else than science and war.
Okay, and is it just my impression, or are those companies that allow like common folks or like human people to go into space more the private institutions or private companies, or am I wrong with this impression?
They are almost all private companies, almost. However, there has been companies which are there are companies which are related to space agencies to work together to send people in space. I remember someone who was speaking for the Roscosmos, basically the Russian space agency, which is one of the pioneers in sending people in space just for the pleasure of being in space. And the space companies are working hand in hand, because not every private company has access to rockets to send people there. Of course, no, with Blue Origin and SpaceX, the private industries has both the money and the technique to send people in space, but it's not the case for every company. So sometimes you have public agencies which are linked with private agencies to send people in space.
And I mean, you've mentioned now public agencies, and we've already talked about like private companies, and also you mentioned Russian public institutions. Are there differences in their like emphasis about their research, and what are those differences?
It's a bit complicated because, of course, every space agency has specificities which are very much related to the political system, to the economical system, and to the history of the country itself. However, not every agency is able to do everything for space exploration. And in particular, the Russian Space Agency has developed more with time to provide larger and larger rockets to send people or equipment in space, together with so basically, as we said, tourists. But if you take the ESA, the European Space Agency, it is working extremely well for launching satellites which are meant for science. And we have very big projects coming in the next decade or decades, which imply the scientific community and technological community of ESA to basically benefit humankind with science. So every space agency has specificities and fields where they are better than the others. But basically, space exploration is a matter of global collaboration and synergies over the world.
Okay. And what about like Europe's role in all of this? Like, what about European space institutions? What do they add to the equation? Let's put it like that.
What is wonderful with the European Space Agency is that it's a collection, a gathering of many different smaller agencies. Taken alone, the French Space Agency, the CNES, will never be able to send satellites, many satellites, big telescopes, big observatories in space alone. And I'm talking about the CNES, but if you go for European countries which have less money injected into space science, it will be even worse for them. They will never be able to do space-related activities. So what is truly wonderful with respect to the European Space Agency, with respect to monolithic agencies such as NASA, JAXA, Roscosmos, and so on, is that it's a collection of individual countries that all together are able to go in space and develop the technology all together. This is one of the best force, one of the best realization of the European Space Agency. And by doing so, actually, we are also able to balance the costs between the different agencies so that not everyone pays the same, but it's all related to the possibilities of financing for each country.
Okay, makes sense. And before, you've already mentioned mentioned that one of your topics that you do research on is like living in space, or humankind living in space. Are there any planets in our solar system that are habitable or in the future, or were habitable in the past?
So in our solar system, which is comprised of 8 planets so far, and sorry, but Pluton is not anymore among the big planets. It has been downgraded. But jokes apart, there is only the Earth, which is so far habitable for the humankind. However, we have very strong arguments pointing towards Mars, which was likely habitable in the past, million years ago, where Mars was very likely covered with oceans, and we have discovered traces of sediments and rocks on the surface of Mars, which tells us that there have been rivers, lakes, seas, and oceans. So at that time in the past, Mars was very likely habitable for some kind of life. Human life, we don't know, but some kind of microbiotical life, maybe, very likely. So that's why we're very interested to send people and instruments on the surface of Mars, so that we can start to dig the soil and detect if there is really liquid water under the surface of the Martian crust. And if there is some liquid water, then maybe there is some traces of past life, or even still some kind of life present on Mars. But that's basically all. Venus is by far too complicated, too hot, too corrosive to be habitable. Mercury is just a burnt rock. And then you have giant gas planets and rock solid ice planets. It's more complicated. However, what is interesting in our solar system is that there are moons. The Earth has a moon, of course, and we cannot live there for sure. But it's less known that Mars has 2 moons. And then as you go further in distance relative to the Sun, you have more moons. Jupiter and Saturn has a lot of giant moons, which are also telluric. And what is interesting is that some of those moons, such as Europa or Enceladus, are frozen, completely frozen now, minus 100 something degrees at the surface. But all our observation in astrophysics tells us that there is very likely a thick crust of ice, and below that there is just a single big ocean. So basically, those moons are like gigantic oceans in space. And because of volcanism and cryovolcanism at the heart of those ocean planets, ocean moons, we may have some kind of life which has developed. So it is of a prime importance to go there and find a way to check and verify if this is true. It's extremely important for biology, evolution, and also human history globally. After that, you can go at much larger distances from the solar system to look at exoplanets.
And how far are those like processes of finding out if there is some kind of life on those moons or exoplanets?
It's a bit complicated to answer this question because it's speculative. However, the idea is that there are more and more programs to send people on Mars, and by doing so, we will be able to start digging the soil to try to find traces of past or current life form. But it would take probably 10 to 20 years to send people on Mars because it's an economical and political problem first, much before the technological problem. Then, if you are discussing moons of our solar system, they are further away. The climatic conditions are even worse than Mars. So there we will need to have a jump in terms of technology before achieving so. And if you are discussing exoplanets, which are planets which are orbiting around another star than our star, the Sun, then it's much more in the future. The closest exoplanet, Proxima Centauri b, is at 4.2 something light years away from us, which means that it will take for the photon, light particle, 4.2 years to travel from the exoplanet to us. And the human technology is not able to travel that fast. With the fastest human spacecraft ever created, we would still need some millennia to go towards the first exoplanet with this kind of technology and spacecraft. So this is clearly something that is for the future, for very likely the next century.
Okay. Maybe to just point out some other things. I'm coming from a legal background, so I'm very much interested in like the legal issues associated with space. And I have to admit, like at university, this is not really taught. So I have not really any experience with like space law, but maybe you could elaborate on some of the issues connected with space.
It is extremely important today. This is a point of discussion in all space agencies. The thing is, we only have a treaty from 1967, if I'm not mistaken, which is the Outer Space Treaty. And it was developed during the Cold Wars because the Russian Soviet bloc and the American bloc were both standing people and satellites, spacecraft in space. At that time, the main question was, who is responsible in the case of a crime? This crime could be from stealing an egg or to do a murder, something like that. At that time, it was very important to create a legal environment for space exploration. And it was done. But this outer space treaty only works up to the limits of the very high altitude and the close environment of the Earth. It doesn't apply to moons and other planets and exoplanets at all.
Okay.
And the idea behind this treaty, there are many, many laws inside, but the main idea is that who is responsible for a crime? It is the nation that belongs where the man or the woman was committed the crime belongs. So if it's let's say at the time of the outer space treaty, if it was a Soviet person committing a crime, it would have been the Soviet Union in globality who was responsible for this act.
Okay.
However, though things have evolved, we envision to go back to the moon to start to implement settlements, permanent settlements. But to whom belongs the surface of the moon? Is the moon belonging to humanity? Is the moon, could we fragmentate the moon surface as a function of, I don't know, the economy of all nations on the Earth, or about their size, the physical size on the Earth, and so on and so on. So that there are many, many small countries belong on the moon. What's happening with private companies? The Outer Space Treaty is not accounting for private companies, because at the time it was only nation, big, solid, and powerful nations that were able to send people in space. But today, there are private companies that are belonging to a consortium of various countries. So if someone from, let's say, the SpaceX or Blue Origin is committing a crime in space, who is responsible? Is it the country where there is the headquarters of Blue Origin or SpaceX? Is it the person? Is it the country of origin of this person? Who is, in terms of legality, who will pay for it? And that's extremely complicated. It's even more complicated when you're discussing mining resources and establishing settlements on the moon or on Mars or whatsoever. Is the soil belonging to someone, and what's happening for private companies? And we can push forward this question and envisioning the next half century. If we are finally able to put settlements aboard the moon, on the moon or Mars, someone will at some point give birth there. What is the nationality of this person? Will it be a moon man or a moon girl? Will it be a Martian? Will it be the same nationality of as the parents, and so on? This is something that lawyers and people who are extremely efficient and competent in all laws are currently working on in each space agency. Because before going further in space, we need to establish the rules of space exploration.
So you're saying that there are processes towards creating those legal frameworks to kind of like solve those.
Yes, in all space agencies there are offices which are currently working on creating a much larger treaty for at least the solar system.
Okay. Well, that was some very interesting insight, and I think we might already end our interview here. Well, I'm actually looking for a dissertation topic, so maybe space law is the way to go for me.
It might be extremely complicated.
Yes, yes. From what you've told me right now, it sounds really complicated. But well, let's end our video here, and thank you for answering the questions.
Thanks a million for inviting me. It's a pleasure.